I never thought I would be writing this, but I feel I have no choice. My name is David, and for 8 years I served as a soldier. War marked me in ways I can't even describe, but nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what happened on November 7th, 2024. That day changed everything. A routine patrol on a familiar road, me and my unit doing what we always did. And then, in the blink of an eye, a deafening boom, an explosion, and everything went black. I died that day, at least for a few minutes. And in the time I spent on the other side, I saw things that even today I can barely put into words. I woke up in a place that didn't look in the least like what I knew. At first, there was only darkness, but it wasn't a frightening void. I was conscious, completely lucid, and that surprised me the most. It wasn't a dream, it wasn't a hallucination. It was real. Then I saw the first thing that made me understand I was no longer in the world of the living. A distant light, unlike any light I had ever seen before. It not only illuminated, it pulsed almost as if it were alive, calling me. I didn't walk towards it, I didn't float. I was simply pulled, as if an invisible force were guiding me without resistance. As I approached the light, something began to change around me. The darkness didn't dissipate like when the sun rises and lights up everything. It was more as if it were being pushed away, pulled from me, revealing a space that looked nothing like anything I had ever seen before. The colors were more vivid than anything in the real world, yet at the same time, it was as if the very atmosphere was charged with an energy I could feel on my skin, if I still had skin. It was then that I noticed something strange. I looked at my hands, and they were not as before. I still had form, I still had a body, but it seemed lighter, almost translucent, as if I were made of something different, something beyond flesh and bone. There was no pain, no fear, only an intense peace that was hard to explain. It was at that moment that I heard a voice. It wasn't an ordinary voice, it wasn't a sound in the traditional sense. It was as if it spoke directly inside me, but with a force that made my entire being shudder. David, just my name, but spoken in a way that carried an indescribable power. I knew instantly who it was. There was no doubt. There was no room for questioning. It was him. Even before seeing him, I already knew. Jesus was there. I didn't need to ask. I didn't need proof. His presence was overwhelming and at the same time filled with a love so deep that it made me feel small, but not insignificant. I wanted to fall to my knees. I wanted to cry. I wanted to ask for forgiveness for everything, but there was no judgment in his presence, only understanding. Then finally, I saw him. Jesus wasn't like the images I had seen throughout my life. He wasn't just a man with serene features, long hair, and a kind gaze. He was light, but not a blinding. A light. It was alive, enveloping, as if every particle of his being were made of something pure, something that transcends anything earthly. His eyes. I will never forget his eyes. They were like fire and at the same time, like the deepest ocean. When he looked at me, I saw everything I was, everything I had ever done, everything I had felt in every moment of my existence, but there was no accusation, no condemnation. On the contrary, it was as if, despite every mistake, every flaw, he still accepted me. He knew every battle I had fought, every burden I had carried, every time I felt fear, anger, or despair. And yet, there he was, before me, calling me by name. For a moment I couldn't speak. How could I? What does one say when faced with the one who created everything? But before I could try to form any word, something changed. The space around us transformed, and suddenly I was no longer just there before him. I saw the earth. I saw my body, my very own body, broken, bleeding, sprawled on the remains of the road I used to patrol. My comrades were around me, trying to save me. Miller was pressing on my wounds. The medic was shouting something. Someone was trying to apply a tourniquet. I could hear their voices, but they seemed distant, as if they belonged to a world I no longer was part of. And the strangest part? I felt nothing, neither pain nor despair. I was merely an observer. As I watched the scene, a strange sensation took over me. I knew that that was my body. I knew that those desperate men trying to save me were my battle brothers, yet I felt completely detached from that reality. It was like watching a movie, but at the same time, something inside me wanted to tell them that everything was okay, that they didn't need to worry. But how? They couldn't hear me. They couldn't see me. I was no longer part of that world. It was then that I realized something that made my stomach, if I still had one, turn. I was dead. There was no doubt. I was on the outside, looking at a body that was no longer mine, at a life that seemed to have been left behind. I looked at Jesus, waiting for some explanation, waiting for him to tell me what would happen now. But he only observed me with that same expression of absolute love and infinite understanding. Then, without needing words, I felt the answer. It's not over yet. I didn't know exactly what that meant, but something inside me knew he was right. There was more. My time there had not yet come to an end. Then, all around me, everything began to change. The earth, my body, my comrades, all grew more distant, more blurred, as if dissolving. And then, what came next was something I could never have imagined. The world around me completely disappeared, as if someone had wiped a screen and replaced it with another. But this new reality was unlike anything I had ever seen or experienced before. The air, if there even was air, seemed to vibrate with something I can't describe. It was as if everything was alive, not just the elements around me, but even the light itself. I felt neither cold nor heat. There was no weight on my limbs, and the only thing that remained was an absolute certainty. I was in a place that did not belong to the world of the living. Then I noticed something even more impressive. I was not alone. Before me, an immense landscape unfolded, but it wasn't made of ordinary matter. The colors were purer, the details impossible to reproduce in any painting or photograph. And on the horizon, there was something that looked like a portal, but not like a physical door. It was more like a veil of intense, pulsating light, calling my soul to cross over. And then I felt a presence beside me. I turned and saw a man standing there, but not just any man. Even before he said anything, I knew who he was. My grandfather. He had died years ago, but there he was, more alive than I had ever seen him. His face radiated joy, his eyes shone with an understanding I did not possess. When he looked at me, it was as if time disappeared. My grandfather smiled at me, and in that moment, all the memories I had of him came flooding back. I remembered the stories he used to tell me when I was a child, the smell of coffee that always accompanied him, the calm way he faced life, but now he seemed different. Not just younger or stronger, but more complete. There was a light within him, something that didn't exist when he was alive on earth. I wanted to embrace him, wanted to ask so many things, but before I could speak, he placed his hand on my shoulder and said in a firm yet loving voice, "David, you cannot stay." His words hit me like a punch in the chest. I didn't want to hear that. How could I not stay? I was dead, wasn't I? This wasn't my place now. I tried to argue, but before I could say anything, I felt another presence approaching, one that was even stronger than my grandfather's. I turned and saw Jesus standing there, watching the scene with that same look filled with truth and love. But now there was something different in his expression, something serious. Then he spoke, "I have something to show you." And before I could ask what it was, everything around me changed again. The glow of the place where I was began to dissolve, and in its place, another scene took shape. It wasn't heaven, nor was it the earth as I knew it. It was something different. And it was there that my vision began. Suddenly, I was standing in a place that looked like Earth, but it wasn't exactly as I remembered. The sky had a strange hue, a mix of colors I couldn't define. The streets were full of people, but something in them deeply disturbed me. Their faces seemed normal at first glance, but when I looked closer, I realized something was wrong. The eyes, they were empty, not as if they were sad or downcast, but as if something essential were missing, as if the spark of humanity had been extinguished. I watched as they walked, smiling, interacting, living their routines, but it was all mechanical, rehearsed, as if they were following an invisible script. I looked at Jesus, expecting an explanation, and he simply raised his hand. In that same instant, my gaze was drawn to something happening at a cafe in front of me. A woman entered the establishment, but instead of taking out money or a card, she merely passed her hand over a small scanner on the counter. A blue glow flashed beneath her skin, something inside her, an implant. Then I understood. This wasn't just a random vision, it was the future. A future where people had accepted something that connected them to a larger system, something that made them part of an invisible gear. I turned to Jesus, and for the first time, I saw sadness in his eyes. "This isn't the end," he said, "but it's the beginning." I wanted to ask what he meant by that, but before I could speak, I saw the scene change before my eyes. Now, the streets were different. Something darker hovered. In the air, giant screens displayed messages about security, progress, and unity, always accompanied by the faces of world leaders I didn't recognize. People seemed calm, even happy, but it was a kind of forced happiness. I looked around and realized something even more disturbing. There were no signs of churches, no cross, no symbol of faith, nothing, as if all spirituality had been erased. Then I saw a man in the middle of the square, looking around in despair. He seemed to be one of the few who wasn't part of the system. Before I could process what was happening, he began to speak. "This isn't right. We were created to be free. This isn't life." But as soon as he finished speaking, the environment around him changed. The people who had been distracted stopped instantly, as if they had received a silent command, and then, without hesitation, they advanced on him. Not with anger, not with gratuitous violence, but with the cold efficiency of those merely carrying out an order. He tried to resist but was subdued, taken away without a fight. There were no screams, no police, no judgment. He simply vanished into the crowd. I turned to Jesus, my heart heavy with what I had just seen. "Don't they realize?" I asked, my voice trembling. He only shook his head. "Deception does not come as tyranny at first. It comes as convenience." I wanted to argue, to say that people would never accept something like that there had always been resistance against total control. But then, Jesus raised his hand again, and the scene before me changed once more. Now I saw families arguing inside their homes, parents quarreling with children, wives weeping before husbands, siblings drifting apart. The reason? The implant. Some refused to receive it, saying they felt something was wrong, that it went against everything they believed in. But others saw no problem at all. "It's just technology," they said. "It's just a way to make life easier." The division was clear. I saw churches being emptied, pastors encouraging their followers to accept the new system, saying there was nothing wrong, that it wasn't the mark of the beast. Some believed, others did not, but those who resisted became outcasts, ridiculed even by those they once called brothers. I felt a tightness in my chest seeing that. The struggle was not only against a system, but against the very hearts of people. Acceptance did not come by force, but by normalization. The more I looked, the more I saw the pattern. First, it was presented as a convenience, then as a necessity, finally as an obligation. But when people realized this, it was already too late. I looked at Jesus and saw the sadness on his face. "They think they still have a choice, but they don't realize they already made it," he said. And when they open their eyes, they will see that they lost not only their freedom, but their very identity. His words were heavy, but true. The deception did not present itself as something evil immediately. It came disguised as progress. The scene changed again, and now I saw a small group of people hidden in a remote place, perhaps a forest or a rural area. They were gathered in silence, praying, sharing simple food, and reading the Bible, a physical Bible, something that seemed rare in those times. Their faces were marked by fatigue, but their eyes held something different. They had peace. It wasn't the artificial peace I saw in those who accepted the system, but something genuine, profound. They were fleeing, living on the margins of a society that considered them enemies, but they didn't seem afraid. On the contrary, they were full of faith. I saw children among them, the elderly, men and women of all ages. All there had chosen a different path. Jesus pointed to them and said, "These are mine. They lost the world, but gained something greater." I looked at that group and realized that they had almost nothing. With no access to the system, they couldn't buy food, couldn't work, couldn't even walk freely through the cities without being reported. But contrary to what one would expect, they were not desperate. They sang softly, shared the little they had, and helped each other. I felt a lump in my throat. Those were the remnants, those who chose not to bow down. But I also saw something more. They weren't just survivors, they were bearers of a light that the world no longer possessed. They were still connected to the truth, while the rest of humanity had surrendered to an illusion. Then the vision changed again, and now I saw the other side of the coin. I saw how those who refused the system were portrayed in society. On the giant screens scattered throughout the cities, news was continuously broadcast. Journalists spoke about a radical group, people who refused progress and represented a risk to the world order. "They are against peace," said a serious presenter. "They spread fear and misinformation. They are a danger to the future we are building." Every word seemed carefully planned to transform those who resisted into villains. And the worst, the people believed it. I saw ordinary citizens denouncing neighbors, turning in friends, even relatives. They did it not out of malice, but because they were convinced they were doing the right thing. I saw a father turn in his own son, a woman denounce her husband. I saw a pastor who once preached about freedom, now encouraging his congregation to follow the new system, saying that those who resisted were stuck in the past. Everything was turned upside down. Good was called evil and evil good. The persecution didn't come only from the powerful, but from the people themselves. The control was so deep that no one realized they were being used as a tool to eliminate those who still saw the truth. I turned to Jesus with a heavy heart. "Do they really not realize?" I asked. He looked at me sadly. The truth was right before them all along, but they chose to ignore it. I wanted to believe. There was still hope for those people, that somehow they would realize their mistake before it was too late. But then, the vision advanced in time. Now, control was absolute. The streets were clean, organized, perfectly silent. But something was wrong. Something deeply wrong. The diversity of thought had disappeared. People moved in a coordinated, almost rehearsed way. They still smiled, still appeared happy, but their eyes were empty. I no longer saw any signs of resistance. Those who refused to accept the system had been erased. It was as if they had never existed. Then Jesus showed me something that made me shudder. I saw an immense stadium packed with people. In the center, a man was giving a speech. He wasn't a traditional political leader, nor a common ruler. He was charismatic, confident, and his words sounded like honey to the crowd. "The new era has begun," he said. "We are free from disorder, fear, and uncertainty. We are one people united by a greater purpose." The people applauded, ovating every word. But then Jesus allowed me to see beyond what human eyes could perceive. Behind that man, something dark hovered, something that wasn't human. Dark, distorted shapes whispered in his ears, guiding every word, every gesture, and the crowd. They didn't see, they didn't realize they were worshipping something that did not come from God. My heart raced. I wanted to scream, to warn those people about what was really happening, but it was as if I were only a spectator, unable to interfere. I saw when the man raised his hands and the audience fell into absolute silence, as if they were waiting for his next words with reverence. The past divided us. Religion, nations, ideologies, all of this caused wars and suffering, but now we are one, free of conflict, free of fear. The stadium erupted into applause. I saw some people crying as if they were witnessing a sacred moment, but I knew. I saw what was behind it all. This unity was not peace, it was submission. I turned to Jesus, feeling a lump in my throat. "Do they really believe that this is good?" I asked, my voice almost failing. He simply nodded. "Deception is subtle, David. It does not present itself as oppression, but as liberation. It does not come as darkness, but as light. They do not see the chains because they were taught to love them." His words echoed within me with a painful truth. Humanity had been conditioned to accept this new order without question. They believed they were being elevated to a new level of existence, but in reality, they were surrendering their souls without even realizing it. Then, I saw something even worse. I saw the final phase of the plan, that which would make slavery irreversible. The vision changed once more, and now I saw something that made my blood run cold. The implant, which before was just a tool of control, now became something deeper. It was no longer just an external device, something that could be removed. It had fused with the people. It was part of them. I saw men and women voluntarily entering update centers where something was injected into them. What was once a chip was now a modification. Something in their DNA was being altered. They were not only part of the system, they were becoming something else. I saw their eyes lose the last vestige of humanity. What remained was no longer God's creation. I trembled at the sight, feeling an indescribable anguish. Is this the end?" I asked Jesus, feeling a deep pain in my soul. He looked at me sadly and replied, "It is not the end of the story, but it is the end for those who choose it." His words hit me like a blow. Now I understood. This was not just about control, not just about a tyrannical government. It was about corrupting God's creation. It was about severing definitively the connection between these people and the Creator. I saw that after receiving that modification, there was no turning back. They no longer felt anything, neither doubt, nor guilt, nor faith, only blind acceptance, a total surrender to the system that was now part of them. I wanted to look away, but Jesus kept my attention fixed on the scene. Now I saw those who had refused the system, the few who still hid far from the cities. They lived with the bare minimum, without technology, without access to anything we once called essential. But something in them was different. I saw miracles happening among them. The sick were cured without medicine. Food appeared where there should have been nothing, and even in the cold and darkness there was warmth and light. These people were completely surrendered to faith. They no longer depended on the world, and despite the persecution, I saw that they were not terrified. On the contrary, they were strengthened. What the world had lost, they still had. But then, I saw the persecution increase. I saw groups being captured, taken to trial. I saw families being separated, parents being forced to watch their children suffer if they refused to accept the mark. "The choice will be painful, but necessary," said Jesus. I saw people being taken for public executions, being labeled terrorists, enemies of peace. The entire world watched these broadcasts and applauded, believing they were eliminating a threat. But as these people were killed, I saw something incredible. Before their last breaths, their eyes lit up. They saw something that others did not, and I knew. They were being received into the kingdom. They had lost nothing. They had gained everything. My heart was heavy with everything I saw. The world I knew no longer existed. Everything had been molded to fit a new order, a reality where God had been erased from society, where people not only followed the system, they belonged to it. I saw that those who accepted the final transformation had no turning back. They looked at those who resisted with contempt, as if they were primitive, ignorant, obstacles to the future. Yet, at the same time, I saw that something inside them was empty. They no longer questioned anything. They no longer felt the weight of doubt, of regret, of the desire to seek something greater. They were merely cogs in a gigantic machine. Then Jesus turned to me and said, "You need to go back." His words hit me hard. Go back. After seeing all this, after feeling what it was to be here, in his presence, I didn't want to. I didn't want to return to a world where all this was about to happen. But then he placed his hand on my shoulder, and in that instant I understood. I had to warn. I had to tell what I had seen because there was still time. A little, but there was. Tell them, David. Some will listen. Not all, but some. And with those words, everything began to disappear around me. The light dissolved, the sound became distant, and then I woke up. The shock of returning was indescribable. I felt my body again, but it was as if it were heavy, limited, weak. The pain came like an overwhelming wave. My lungs burned, my chest ached, and voices screamed around me. "He's back! My God, he's back!" someone exclaimed. I opened my eyes and saw blurred faces, bright lights, beeping monitors. I was in a hospital. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry. I had died. I was dead for 7 minutes, but against all logic my heart started beating again. The doctors called it a miracle, but I knew it wasn't just a miracle. It was a mission. The following days were confusing. I tried to process everything I saw, everything I heard. I tried to tell some close people, but soon I realized that most didn't want to listen. Some thought it was a delirium caused by trauma. Others smiled politely, but clearly didn't believe. But then I began to notice something strange. The things Jesus showed me were already starting to happen. I saw news about new identification technologies, about systems promising greater security, about changes in the way people dealt with money and control. It was subtle, but it was there, the beginning of what I had witnessed. It was then that I understood that it didn't matter if people believed it or not. My duty was to tell. Since that day, my life was never the same. I am no longer just a soldier. I am someone who saw what is to come. I know that many will ignore this, that they will call me crazy, a fanatic, someone who only had a near-death experience and misinterpreted it. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt, and I know it was real. What Jesus showed me wasn't a distant possibility, it was a warning. The gear is already turning, the system is already being prepared, and when everything is ready, there will be no turning back. But there is still time. There are still those who can see the truth before it's too late. And that's why I'm telling all of this. If you are reading this and feel that something inside you is restless, do not ignore it. Do not be deceived by comfort, by the promise of security, or by pretty words that hide the true intention. Strengthen your faith now, because there will come a moment when the choice will no longer be easy. I do not know why Jesus chose me to see this. I do not know why I was sent back. But I know that my mission is to speak. And now you know, the rest is in your hands.